Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonnor and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ. The Uncommon Good.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonnor.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
And we are coming to you from these United States of America. I am in my normal location here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College and the Director of Zeta Institute. You can check all that out at mchs.edu. Bud, you are in a strange new land. Not really all that new, but where are you at? But where are you usually, and what are you usually doing?
Normally, when I record, I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as Director of the National Institute for Newman Studies, newmanstudies.org. But right now, I'm recording from the beautiful state of Nebraska, and I got to say, Bo, you guys are not messing around with your summer in the Midwest this year.
Well, you know what's funny about that is up until this week, it had been absolutely beautiful. It was crazy how nice it is. But this week, it decided to really try to bake everyone a bit because it was worried that, that we were enjoying everything too much. So are all of your kids, good and crispy and, fattened up in sweets with stuff because they're out there with the grandparents?
Yeah, when as a father, when you feel very emotionally attached to Nebraska, but your children are growing up in Pennsylvania, whenever you come here, you have to get them some Taco John's, some Runza. Is it okay that do they have to sponsor us now on the show? Some Amigos.
I want you to try to talk about it so that they'll sponsor. At least I would take a Taco John's sponsorship. Did I tell you that I actually think one of my family members helped found Taco John's?
Well, the amazing thing is their tots are I forget what they call them, but those are delicious. And I've just been dumping Dorothy Lynch on the kids' salads by the gallon. And they're all really confused because it's just flowing out of the bottle.
Yeah, and you're like buying all sorts of Nebraska furniture and Omaha steaks. And they're like, this is really confusing, Dad.
The good life. Are you enjoying the good life yet?
Soak it all in. We only have a week.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that everybody's making sure to have a good time, and I love all of the grandparents out there. I've had a chance to meet your whole family, so make sure to tell them hello for me, and maybe as you're driving back through, you can throw some runs out the window.
All right, will do. But who are we actually underwritten by, Bo?
We are underwritten by Mercy College of Health Science, who, although they do not have their own salad dressing or food item that they're known for, they are known for wonderful healthcare that prepares people for the world of healing and medicine. mchs.edu. We're getting done with the summer semester, which has been, of course, one of the weirdest summer semesters on Earth. But then we're also getting prepared for fall, which starts in September here, coming up soon. Still time to go look into it. mchs.edu. Make sure to give them a look.
Yeah, when you were talking, I got a text from Jimmy. Potato olays. That's the term I was looking for, potato olays. But no, as you're saying, Bo, like on the show, we try to start lighthearted. It's hard not to record these days and have your thoughts go to the many challenges that we're facing right now. I saw like wildfires in Colorado now. I know California was already trying to tackle that, but our prayers go out to those folks. And it's great to have in Des Moines a community like Mercy College that's training great nurses and other medical professionals to enter that field and extend to others, I think, compassion alongside great healthcare.
Would you dare to say that your course in servant leadership is sort of the potato olays of the curriculum?
That's what I tell the kids. If the students, if you really want to understand this course, recognize that the rest of your time here at Mercy is really like the entree. But would you have a fulfilling experience without the potato olays of servant leadership?
I like it. What else I like on the show, Bud, is this doesn't happen every day, but we're going to have another Bonnor on the show. So Michael Bonnor, who has he's a political advisor, historian, and he's written the book, The Last Empire of Iran. I've got to know him a bit through the magic of Twitter and reading some of his stuff. We briefly talked, and it actually seems like Bonnor traits actually adhere all across the globe. I hope not to, waste the entire show talking about Bonnor connections, but I think we have a really interesting show coming up for folks about the historical, not lacuna, but like a part of history that's very formative to the church's understanding of the common good that we often leave out.
Yeah, it's great to have Iowa Catholic Radio in a place where we can dive deep into history, which I think is sometimes, something lacking on air. But just knowing Michael's work, I think our listeners are in for a treat, and starting to look into this fascinating time in history as a way of trying to situate ourselves as faithful followers of Jesus within our own historical context.
I think we're going to try to be the one, let's make this pledge here, bud. We'll be the one American radio show interviewing a Canadian, and we won't mention hockey or maple syrup. Let's make that pledge right now.
Yeah, well, and we're probably the one show talking to a Canadian about the Iranian Empire, but I'll keep hockey and maple syrup out of it.
Because I do know that, like, where did you actually start? Did you start watching hockey out at Pittsburgh? Was that because of Pittsburgh or just because of Brandon McGinley having hockey here?
Well, I'll be honest, so Rachel's family, they take a fishing trip each year. It's to the Dakotas today, but back in the day it was Canada. And when we were staying at the lodge, like, hockey would be the only thing on. And up there was this announcer who was like just so gung-ho about playoff hockey. So that kind of drew me into it. I have, for the sake of like full disclosure, I can't portray myself as like this passionate hockey fan that's tuned in every night. But if you're around the water cooler or the coffee hour after Mass in Pittsburgh, you want to know if the Pens won or lost the night before. That's pretty essential.
There you go. Well, folks, it's the Uncommon Good. We're looking forward to talking with Michael, not about hockey, but the Iranian Empire, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Uncommon Good. This is Bo Bonnor with Dr. Bud joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to our show. It's wonderful to have you with us. Today, we're going to talk with Michael Bonnor, the author of The Last Empire of Iran. Michael, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, just to get this out of the way for everyone, I do not know Michael Bonnor, but I assume every single Bonnor on earth is related. So I was very happy when I heard you were going to get on the show. I don't know the existence of Canadian Bonnors. The Bonnors that I'm all from are Southern Bonnors. We're a wily bunch, but so is there a whole clan of Bonnors that I need to meet up in Canada?
Yeah, definitely. There are actually very few of us here. My family is the only group of Bonnors that I'm aware of, but I would wager that we're related. It's not actually a common name.
Oh, no. And
I know.
And so a historian, a political advisor, but the author of this book that we're wonderful to have you on the show. I actually think the Bonnors is not completely unrelated to what we're talking about, because in what I've looked back, the Bonnors are Normans who sort of end up in historical records in various places in Europe because we're these sort of Northerners. We come down, we end up in France, we end up, actually in very different places all the way down. Well, our relatives, I should say, in Sicily. We end up in sort of Britain and Ireland and Scotland, and then over into the United States. The reason I bring this up and think this is interesting pertains to your book. So The Last Empire of Iran, I would venture to say that even people who are historically minded in the West, who would know things about the Greek empires, the Roman ones, maybe even Byzantium, the idea of what is going on any further east into the Middle Ages before we get into the Middle East, before we get to the sort of Islamic and Christian interchange, that really people lose sort of an understanding, I would say, of what's going on. I think some people read the Old Testament and they know King Cyrus, maybe know who Xerxes is because they watched a movie about it or something.
Right.
But the idea that simultaneous with in the West, Christian West, that there's a bunch of barbarians moving into an old empire's turf and deciding it's really cool and wanting to take it over. So like all of these barbarians, like the Normans, who move in and try to be more Christian Roman than the Romans even were. You have this happening when the Arab Islamic groups move into the quote unquote East and start to find a sort of similar dynamic. There's this old empire that existed that they in many ways fall in love with and adapt to their new realities. But we don't even know what we don't even know what to call it. You call it the last empire of Iran, but it goes by many different names. And if I'm not mistaken, do you think that's a good way to say like what your book is about, is to talk about, you call it the sedentary cultures and the sort of nomadic cultures, and how the great Eastern empire that is Persia in its various forms becomes what we know it as today. So a very difficult question. What is the Persian Empire for all of us who don't know what it is?
Okay. Well, you let's start with Cyrus. You mentioned Cyrus. He's a figure of some importance in the Bible. Obviously, he is the founder of what you could call the world's first real international empire. There had been big states before, Sumeria, Assyria, Babylon, the Elamites, and so forth. Obviously, these figures these peoples and empires are mentioned in Scripture also. But it was Cyrus, a Persian king, who unified most of the Near East from about Egypt. It was his descendants who actually conquered Egypt. But at its height, the empire which Cyrus founded stretched from Egypt to the Hindu Kush mountains in the east. And this was the world's first big international multi-ethnic, polylingual, whatever you like to call it, empire, with Persia at its center. Persia is, properly speaking, the southwest of Iran. It's corresponds roughly to the modern Iranian province called Fars, Fars. This was famously the empire that was overthrown by Alexander the Great, and resisted by the 300 Spartans, which you alluded to before. Alexander's successors sort of divided up the old Persian Empire amongst themselves, and eventually their own states fell apart and were conquered by others. Most famously, the so-called Parthians, a nomadic Iranian people, overthrew the most famous successor to Alexander. The house that he founded was, or the dynasty that he founded was called the Seleucid state. They were overthrown by the Parthians, and a couple of centuries later, the Parthians themselves were overthrown by a family called Sasanian. The so-called Sasanian Empire is the main subject of my book, and it was that empire that corresponds roughly to the 220s up until the year 651. The 220s corresponds to, or really the whole 3rd century corresponds to really a very rough time in Roman history, the so-called crisis of the 3rd century, and we pass from there to the rise of Constantine, and from Constantine we get to Theodosius, and eventually famously to the Emperor Justinian, and before we know it, we're into the last great war of antiquity at the beginning of the 7th century between Rome and Persia, and the curtain comes down in the year 651 with the Arab conquest and the killing of the last Sasanian king, Yazdgerd III. So that's sort of very, very rough potted history of the period in question for you.
And I think what's interesting about this is you literally just rattled off hundreds of years of history, and you did a great job for us. I appreciate this. What starts to be mesmerizing is even when people begin to care about. So we're talking here on Iowa Catholic Radio. They care about their faith. They want to learn about the ancient world. They want to learn about the world that sort of gave birth to what a lot of people think the Middle Ages and the sort of time period where Catholic Church, for instance, comes to its understanding of Catholic social teaching, what our show's about, common good, how the church and the state relate. But it seems that we try to talk about only one lung, as it were. And, Pope Benedict XVI, when he was Pope, has famously said this about the church, that the church has two lungs, the East and the West. But even seems civilizationally, we will act like Rome or Byzantium or Europe is sort of doing all of these things in a vacuum, whereas this entirety of a world that becomes not only important for the time period that you just said, but as your book points to, is foundational to the world that comes after it, after Islam takes over that region.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's such a gray area for us? Why is it shrouded in mist and not talked about in a sufficient way, as it were?
Good question. I think that there are two primary reasons. One is the difficulty of the historical sources involved. Unlike most of Roman history, especially something like Roman Republican history, where you have, like there are whole weeks that pass where we have them, virtually all covered in a historical source, or we have very detailed accounts about high politics and so forth. We don't have that kind of thing for Iranian history practically at any period. There's no Iranian Thucydides or Procopius or great. There's no equivalent of the Venerable Bede or anything like that. So a lot of what we're looking at are Roman sources that are sort of taking note of Iranian events because they're at war or because there's some kind of church-related problem. So a lot of those foreign sources are hostile, and you have to sort of filter out that bias or somehow take account of it. Then you have the fact that it seems like a lot of contemporary contemporary Iranian history gets recycled in later medieval chronicles from the Islamic period. These are not written in Persian. They're written in Arabic, which means that if there was an indigenous historical tradition, that it's passed through translation, possibly more than once. So names get garbled, events get misunderstood. Editors probably chopped out a lot of stuff that they didn't think was interesting, or whatever. They're very much imperfect. So there's a lot of sort of historiographical work that has to go into just understanding the sources themselves, and that's not easy, and for many people, just frankly, it isn't very interesting. The second problem, I think, is that sort of late antique Iranian history sort of gets lost in this sort of no man's land between the ancient world and the coming of Islam, and that at best, for many historians in the past, I think, and certainly for the Arabic, the sort of Perso-Arabic chroniclers themselves, the Sasanian world often gets portrayed as a kind of prelude to Islam, a kind of age of decadence and arguably even degeneracy that then gets superseded by a new religion and a new culture. Now, I don't agree with that at all, as you can probably gather from the book, But I think that that's been a common problem, which is still very hard to get over. So the way I approached it is that I exercise a great deal of skepticism about sources, and I basically start by throwing away all the anecdotes or sort of, exaggerations or obvious lies, that sort of thing, that I come across in later sources, unless they can be corroborated in contemporary accounts, contemporary Roman or Syrian or Armenian accounts. That happens more often than you might think. So it's possible to reconstruct, I think, fairly well a good idea about the course of events, chronology, the key players, and so forth. But unfortunately, hardly a single person or historical personage or historical actor, if you like, ever really comes into focus. You don't get the sort of personal views of people the way you do in later medieval history, or in say like the letters of Cicero help you reconstruct the personality of late Republican statesmen, or the commentaries of Caesar and so forth. So you get a good overall picture, but you don't get the very, very minute detail.
Michael, this is Bonnor, and I'm very fond of a historian by the name of Christopher Dawson, and he brings up the point that, if you want to know like the beating heart of a civilization or a culture, to pay attention to its religion. And despite widespread religious literacy today in the West, I think many of our listeners, of course, would have a handle on Christianity and Judaism and even Islam. But pardon my if I mispronounce this, but like Zoroastrianism would have been the religion most dominant in this empire. Could you give us a bird's eye view of that tradition? Like, what was the sort of vivifying principle of this empire's religious life?
Okay, yeah, you're absolutely right, and you pronounced it perfectly right. Zoroastrianism is ostensibly one of the oldest world religions. It comes out of a kind of undifferentiated pantheon, religious pantheon worshipped by the Indo-European speaking peoples, similar to the Norse gods, the Roman gods, or even modern Hinduism. So it comes out of a essentially sort of polytheistic world where the forces of nature are worshipped, and there's like a sky god corresponding to Zeus, or so on and so forth. Anyway, Zoroaster himself, also called Zarathustra, was supposedly a priest of this old religion, and he came up with a new idea whereby there were not many gods. There were actually two. One called Ahura Mazda, who is associated with goodness and light, and the sun with procreation and growth and so forth, and his evil counterpart called Angra Mainyu, roughly corresponding to the devil, I guess you could say, who is associated with darkness and evil and so forth. And these two gods are in a sort of cosmic struggle, and mankind is obliged to participate in the struggle, ideally on the side of light. This is obviously the foundation of Manichaeism, which initially inspired St. Augustine, and it's has had some influence on other Christian heresies and so forth. So this religion has it's a religion that has scriptures, but the scriptures that have come down to us are in a very sort of mutilated form, and they're incomplete. In fact, the situation is so bad that we know that things have been lost, but we don't know what has been lost. We don't know how much has been lost. So it's very difficult to reconstruct exactly what, say, ritual life was like, or what, whether there was anything corresponding to a public liturgy, and what it would have been like. So scholars of religion will debate these kinds of things probably forever. It's also hotly contested to what extent modern day Zoroastrianism, which still has some adherents, was similar to the older version. Now, leaving all that stuff aside, the fundamental point here is that the Sasanian state established the Zoroastrian religion as the sort of official state doctrine in the 220s, making the Iranian Empire the world's first great confessional state. This is a good century at least before Constantine and Nicaea, and obviously well before Theodosius I, who is responsible for the establishment of the Christian religion within the Roman state. So it's possible to suggest, I wouldn't push too hard, but it's possible to suggest that the notion of a Christian Roman Empire is sort of modeled on the idea of a Zoroastrian Iranian one. That there would be a close relationship between church and state, between the Zoroastrian hierarchy and the ruler, and so forth. Now, that's also a subject of some debate. But what I argue in the book, though, and I think there's a good deal of evidence for it, is that the Christians within Iran were always a growing minority population who were initially persecuted. But it wasn't long before Christianity was granted full tolerance, a sort of Edict of Milan type moment under King Yazgard I in the early 5th century. And despite some successive kings sort of waffling back and forth with persecution and tolerance, that by the end of the 5th century, you have the establishment of a properly indigenous Iranian church on the model of the Roman one, under the favor, if not the actual patronage, of the Persian king. And Christians within the Iranian Empire continue to become more and more influential. You find that they're serving the king in very high and influential positions at court. And in several surviving historical texts from the period, you will encounter the stories and rumors that various Persian kings actually became Christian, that they converted. I don't think there's any truth to that, but it does suggest efforts on the part of the court, the royal court, to conciliate a very important population, and to show that an Iranian Christian could be a loyal subject of the Zoroastrian king in exactly the same way that Zoroastrian subjects were.
Michael, so, we're coming up on the break, but this is fascinating stuff that we're going to go to the break right now. But when we get back, we'll get right into this. We have Michael Bonnor on the show, the author of The Last Empire of Iran. Stick around with The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this. Dr. Bonnor, joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for coming back to listening to the show. As we had in the first segment, our guest is the author, political advisor, and historian Michael Bonnor, the author of The Last Empire of Iran. Michael, thank you for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.
So when we left on the last segment, we were talking about the fascinating history that not only of how Zoroastrianism played a role within the empire, the last empire of Persia before the Islamic invasions, but also how there was a role of Christianity. There was an Iranian Christianity that sprung up inside of the Zoroastrian Empire. What starts to be interesting about this time period, and like you hinted at in the last segment, the idea that you could have a state that was a confessional state where everyone would be under a Christian king, a Zoroastrian king, that comes up during this time period. But furthermore, even something like the religion that the Persian Empire had, as you pointed out, it sprang from many different sources, but this age, the sort of last part of antiquity, was an age of unification. How is it that we were going to have empires from one river to the other? How was it that we were going to have a unified religion that had the ability to speak as one? In doing the research for your book, why is this such a principle that sort of the icing on the cake of antiquity is this concern with unity?
I think that's a fascinating question, and I'm afraid that I simply have no answer. I don't know what it was that was motivating that trend, but it is nevertheless a trend that you find almost everywhere. It was during this period that the Talmud was written. The sort of definitive commentaries and interpretation of the Jewish law. This was the sort of golden age of Christological heresies and the great ecumenical councils, and it's the same moment. Even Julian, the Emperor Julian, who was a notorious hater of Christians, even his version of paganism was a kind of peculiar one that was modeled on Christianity, with a sort of priestly hierarchy and with the codification of doctrine. And it's the fashion for Neoplatonist thought and sort of codifying these ideas was very much very much the spirit of the age. What I will say, though, is that it's really questionable to what extent this was true of Zoroastrianism. Were there schools of thought that the so-called Orthodox Zoroastrians would consider or would have considered heretical? We have we have some evidence that there were big meetings of Zoroastrian priests similar to church councils, but it's sort of debatable whether these things really happened and what they actually discussed. But the evidence we have is focused mainly on determining what Zoroastrian scripture was, as opposed to what Zoroastrian orthodoxy was, what right belief was. The inscriptions that have come down to us from one Zoroastrian priest by the name of Kerdir, who had a great deal of influence over the Sasanian court, suggest that he was really very much less concerned with orthodoxy than he was with proper liturgical or ritual usage. So that's a sort of open question, and of course, all of these trends that we don't find in Zoroastrianism, in Christianity and Judaism and Manichaeism and so forth, they crop up again within Islam. Islam is arguably the sort of quintessential late antique religion that sort of codifies doctrine in the simplest possible manner that has ever gained acceptance. It has a creed consisting of very few words, and it has sort of commands you to pray 5 times a day and so forth, and demands. It has a sort of obviously a holy book as well. This is unthinkable in any sort of age of the world. And to go back to the beginning, I have no idea what caused it. It's simply a trend that you just observe practically everywhere. There's probably a parallel somewhere in China. I don't know what it is. There probably is one. Codification, the classics or something.
Yeah, Michael, one thing I'm struck by when I was reading your article was, for those who are living at the height of a great empire, it feels often to human beings that will last forever.
Yeah.
And even up to the very final decades of an empire, it seems like very few realize how fragile things are. And you make some interesting points about this, like the future we want is rarely the future that we actually get. And you say also in that article that civilization outlasts politics. I know this is moving, it's kind of putting on more like the philosopher's hat than the historian's hat, but based on the research that you've done, do you have any thoughts about how communities live well within empire? Like, is it just a sense like to recognize the fragility even of this very high culture, sort of like elaborately structured order? What does it mean to, be a citizen? I guess what I'm thinking about is like, it's always dangerous to draw too directive lines from like a historical experience to our own time. But,
Right.
living in a day and age where most of our listeners will be like within the American Imperium, you can begin to see some analogies here, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, it's an interesting contrast. There's no longer a Roman Empire. There's no longer an Iranian Empire. Those are long gone. And, they will never come back. But the Roman religion, Christianity, has survived. And it is the greatest religion in the world today. But the Zoroastrian religion is not. It did not survive its empire. Why? I don't know. The Islamic caliphates are gone. There's still Islam, but different schools of Islam debate whether you can even have Islam without the caliph. I forget who it was. It was like what is his name? Ibn Taymiyyah. He says no caliph, no Islam. So people will probably debate this forever. In the case of the point I was trying to make about civilization and politics is that there's just simply no. I can hardly think of a historical example of let me put it this way: there are very, very few political systems that have continued on for to such an extent that people would confidently say that they will always be there. People will talk about, for example, the continuity of Chinese culture going back a very, very long way, and within certain reasonable limits, that's probably a fair thing to assert. But how many Chinese dynasties have there been? How many times has China been ruled by foreigners, by invaders? The last dynasty, the last emperor was a Manchurian. There is no very little continuity within human political structures, but there's far more within culture. And as an outsider, I'm not an American, but as an outsider, I would say that one of the interesting things about America is the politics and culture are actually very similar. The idea of an experiment in republican government and liberty, it is no less cultural than it is political. Obviously, there are political institutions, but the American culture strikes me as one that is far more idealistic than, say, Canadian or British culture with which I'm more familiar, but also somehow at the same time more realistic than something like the idealism of French Enlightenment republicanism or some other similar thing. So I know that we live in difficult times and so forth, but I would be optimistic that as long as people as long as Americans believe in their culture, as long as they believe in the values on which their country was founded, I would continue to be optimistic. Canada is a very different place. Canada is more about stressing the continuity of old world monarchy in the new world. I think we've made a success of it too, just in a very different way. But we are arguably sort of paragons of stability compared to many other parts of the world. But to go back to the Sasanian example, when I wrote that article, and of course when I wrote the book, I'm thinking of this sort of great imperial vision of an empire uniting the entire civilized world of Western Eurasia. And there was a moment at which the Persian king had just about succeeded in doing that, having almost completely swallowed up the Roman Empire. And at that moment, in about the year 624, 625, there would have been no reason to think that was going to change, and yet it suddenly did. The Roman Emperor Heraclius led a counterattack through Armenia and took the fight right to the Persian capital, and that was basically the end of the Persian Empire. It was downhill after that. And then, even though that settlement between Rome and Persia might have worked out, the Arab conquest begins, and both empires are left. Persia is completely overrun, and Rome is left a shell of its former self.
That brings to mind someone else I know that we've both read and interacted with Nassim Nicholas Taleb, as you start throwing out words like anti-fragile and fragile. And it's interesting to think that, in economic and political power, those truly seem like the things that where power resists. But history proves time and again that though powerful, extremely fragile. It takes only very specific, and to borrow more words from it only takes like a few black swans, as it were, a few unpredictable things that will really crack the entirety of the edifice of political power. But culture, as it truly starts to be the anti-fragile thing. It is the thing that you are amazed at as someone who begins to read in the past, where it keeps showing up. And we only have about 3 minutes left, but I think that's the note that I would throw back to you to hope to end on, because I think that's what your book brilliantly shows is we get confounded by this paradox that the powerful thing ends up being fragile, and the thing that seems to be like, more, maybe loose or not have the true power ends up being the anti-fragile thing. And I wonder if you think that's bears out in your book.
I think that you're absolutely right, and this is. I think this is a historical fact. I don't know what the reason for it is, but it seems to be borne out in many different times and in many different places. But in the case of Iran has been conquered by foreigners, much like China, several times, but each time it comes back with a new empire. First of all, and then that one gets overthrown again, and the cycle starts over. But the culture remains remarkably stable. I think that there's no better proof of it than the celebration of the Nowruz festival, which is the Persian New Year, going back, millennia to the Zoroastrian religion. Even in the Islamic Republic of Iran, during the Nowruz, you would not know that it was a Muslim country. This is a very ancient festival that has been sort of continually reborn as not so much as a religious one, but as a symbol of national unity, if you will. But then there's, of course, the survival of the Persian language itself. This is people were talking Persian, when when Herodotus was writing, right? Obviously, people still speak Greek too, but the Greek language has suffered less less conquest and less trouble than Persian has. In no other part of the old Islamic empire does the native language survive. Only in Iran. I mean, there's some exceptions with parts of Armenia, but for the most part, the survival of the Persian language is a miracle of history, which shows, if not actual anti-fragility, then certainly remarkable robustness, and it's still here with us, and it will be for some time, long after, inshallah, the fall of the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing I want to end on is there's a lot of talk in modern Christian parlance about what do we do when things are falling apart. And I mean, maybe we're just humans are over dramatic about their situation. But I actually think that this is what the takeaway I got from your book is, put not your trust in princes, kingdoms rise and fall, but the sheer ability for certain human institutions and realities to be anti-fragile. And if we're saying what we say about the church here on the show is true, that these human realities bear this out. Dr. Michael Bonnor, thank you for coming on the show. It was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for making time to be on our show.
No, my pleasure. It was great. And I hope we can keep in touch.
Yeah,
thanks,
wonderful.
Michael.
Yeah, so make sure to go check out the article or his book, Dr. Michael Bonnor, The Last Empire of Iran. This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our city, our state, our country, the solar system, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonnor and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.